Well, hello everybody. This is Claudio Berstein here from Biamp Systems. Today with presenting the TEC-X, the network AV wall panel. So we're going to cover the hardware first, even though probably you have seen it before, as we presented this about a year ago. I'm going to talk a little bit of the product features, touch on the installation, and then jump into the program, which is probably kind of like the more important stuff of these new remotes. And then I'm going to explain a little bit how does it work, and basically a little bit of what is actually happening in the background. So the TEC-X, it's are basically Ethernet-based PoE-powered wall controllers. There are a couple of models. They can be daisy chain up to 4 devices. So even though they're PoE power and network devices, they do have 2 ports on the back, and you can actually go from one to the next, and basically have up to 4 devices from the same PoE, from the PoE port. So that makes it really, really convenient. It has a high contrast touch-enabled LCD screen, and basically on this screen we can program on-screen buttons, and there are different layouts that we can use. I'm going to show you those in just a minute. The other thing is the brightness of the LED screen is automatically adjustable to the ambient light. So there is a tiny sensor on that screen that it will check the ambient light, and actually it changes the brightness of the LCD depending on how that light changes. There is also an LED light bar indicator on the top of the remote that basically you can correlate to an action that the remote is doing. So basically it can be used as an indicator of a certain state. As I said, we do have 2 models available. Both come in both black and white. So we have the TEC-X 1000 and the TEC-X 2000. The 1000 unit basically offers 6 programmable on-screen buttons, and these buttons can be configured to be either latching, so basically 2 states on/off, or momentary, that basically you just press and something happens, for instance, like recalling a preset. There's also a rotary encoder that allows you rotation settings, so basically for controlling volume, but it also has a push mechanism. So basically you can also add a latching or momentary action to that knob. So you can actually press that button and have something happen when you do so. Now, even though you have 6 buttons, that doesn't mean that you actually need to use 6 buttons when you're configuring. There are actually several layouts that you can choose from, and they go, in the case of the TEC-X 1000, they go from 2 buttons to 6 buttons. And you can pretty much pick and choose any of these, and even if you choose one of these layouts, that doesn't mean that you need to use all of the buttons. You can pick one that accommodates the buttons that you need, and if you don't want to configure a button, basically that button will just not show up on screen. There will be nothing on screen. Or you could even hide buttons. So you could actually configure a button and then hide it, and basically that button will not appear on screen. So you are not kind of like attached to basically having to program the number of buttons in the layout. The TEC-X 2000 allows you to has up to 12 programmable on-screen buttons, and pretty much same concept. So they can be latching or momentary. And since you have more buttons, well, there are more layouts, and they go all the way from 3 buttons to 12 buttons. So you can configure them however you want. Now, there is a table mount accessory, and I believe that is already shipping as well. This allows you to mount the remote on that little mount, and it is only for a single unit or the last unit in a chain. And the reason for that is that the table mount comes with a pre-installed 6-foot cable that is actually wired through that yoke in the middle of the mount, and it comes on the bottom, and actually you can route it either directly to the bottom or to the back. But since that cable is already installed, and there's no way to actually pass a secondary cable, so that's why if you're using the table mount, that has to be reserved for the last remote in the chain or a single remote, because you cannot daisy chain from that to another. Now, as I said, when you install them, you can daisy chain up to 4 controllers. So you could actually have like a small PoE switch, and with one single port or even an injector, you could actually have 4 of these devices connected in a single cable link. Now, the device limits are exactly the same as the TEC-1, so you could have up to 64 devices being hosted by a server or server I/O, or up to 32 on a Tessera Forte. And that is dependent on whether or not you're using parlay microphones or AMP450. So it's kind of like the same thing as we are used to with the TEC-1. So if you're using parlay or AMP450 amplifier on the device, basically those numbers are reduced. So in the server, you will be able to proxy up to 24 of these remotes, and on the Forte, you will be able to proxy up to 12 of these remotes. Now, when it comes to programming, and probably this is kind of like the most surprising thing about the TEC-X, is that it uses a complete new programming paradigm. It's like we are used to programming everything with blocks. So pretty much anything that we add to our system, we add a block, and that block represents what we're adding. And that is true up to this point with expanders or processing blocks or anything that we're adding. The TEC-X actually departs from that, so there is no DSP block. So that actually implies a lot of really interesting things. And the first one is that, well, if it is not a block, then that means that the TEC-X is not part of the system itself. And this is kind of like something really important to keep in mind. This means several things. It's like when you save a Tessera file, that Tessera file doesn't know if it is being controlled or not by a TEC-X. And a TEC-X doesn't know anything about the Tessera file that is controlling. So whenever you save a Tessera file, if you add TEC-X controllers, you're going to have separate files for the TEC-X remote controls, and you're going to have one for each one. So let's say that you have a system that has, I don't know, five TEC-X controllers, and they are completely different. You're going to have your Tessera file, and then you're going to have 5 control path designer files for those 5 remotes. And those are going to be very simple, very small JSON files. And one of the things that you gain from this is that you can reuse these files. So let's say that you have a system and you program your remote, and that remote, you want to use exactly that same configuration in a different room. As long as the instance IDs that you are targeting to control are the same, basically you can just load that configuration and it will just work. So you can actually mix and exchange a little bit. And after the programming section, when I talk a little bit more of how it works in the background, you would understand a little bit better. The other thing that is important that I don't have here in the slide is that the way that the control path designer actually controls the series by using standard TTP commands. So pretty much anything that you can control with a TTP command, you can control from the control path designer. I got a question here. With the TEC-X being separate from the Tessera design, is it possible to set up a TEC-X to control a third-party device directly? Yes. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. So basically, there are several things that you can do. You could, the device or the server that's being the proxy for your control path is not necessarily the target. And what I mean by the target is the device that you want to control. So that means that system A could be the proxy for a TEC-X that is controlling system B. And that system B doesn't necessarily need to be a Tessera system. It could be something else. Bear in mind that basically the target is one single device. So you could dedicate a TEC-X to control lights. And basically that controller will control only lights. But we're going to touch on that a little bit further. All right. Any other questions before we jump into programming? But does that mean that you still have a Tessera Forte somewhere in the system? Currently, yes, because basically the control path itself is not the one sending the command. The server class device is the one sending the command out. So basically, there is kind of like a translation, for lack of a better term, that happens in the server class device, and then it will resend that command out. Okay, we're going to touch on that in just a little bit. All right, so I'm going to jump here to my Tessera software. I don't have anything opened, and before I do anything, there's a new icon. I don't know if you can you notice here. Basically, this icon is a control path designer. Also, if I go to tools, I have my control path designer link here. So that allows me to actually launch control path designer. But before I do that, I'm going to go here to device maintenance and connect to my network. And here I see that I have a Tessera Forte. It's not configured. You can see that there is a device ID of 0, so there's no configuration, and I have a Tessera Connect. If I go to remote devices, well, I can see here that I have 3 remotes. There is a TECX 1000 and 2 of the 2000 models that I have connected to my network. So pretty much discovery works exactly the same way as it does when we're using any other type of remote. Now, from this window, we can do several things. We can change the network settings. So here we can change the host name if we want to, or we can change if we want to set up a fixed IP address for the remotes. By default, they can be in DHCP, so they will obtain an IP address automatically. You can also set device description. That is basically if you want to add some text that identifies where the remote is located or something that is meaningful to you. And the more important one is the properties. Here, this window is actually very similar to the window in the TEC-1. We can see the host name, the serial number. We can change the device ID, and same with any other remote that we program in a Tessera system. Basically, what matches the device to what we're controlling is the device ID, right? So what does this mean? Well, say that you have a room and you want to put a remote in opposite corners of that room, but you want those 2 remotes to actually mimic or mirror each other. The easiest way to do that is basically set those 2 remotes with the same ID. You make a single program, and when you load, those 2 remotes will get exactly the same program. So it pretty much works the same way. Other things that you can do, you can set up a lock code, so the remote will lock automatically after a certain amount of time. You can set, well, how long it's going to take for it to log out. There is both a sleep and a dim timeout, so how much time is going to wait until the screen dims, and then how long it's going to take until it actually goes to sleep. The light bar brightness, the normal LCD brightness, and the dim LCD brightness. Since basically we have these 2 settings here, you can actually set what is the brightness on both when it's fully lit and when it's dimmed. So you can actually change those parameters. You can also reboot, and so you can pretty much do the same kind of things that you can do with other remotes. Now, similar to other devices that we have already in our line, this utilizes a secure connection to the server. So in order for me to be able to proxy these devices and work with these devices, one thing that I need to remember to do is that in the device that is going to be the proxy, in my case, my Tessera Forte, I need to go to network settings and make certain that enable SSH and HTTPS is enabled. That is because basically I'm using some of those features for the TEC-X, and if I don't enable that, basically I would still be able to see them in remote devices, but when I try to configure them, I won't be able to do that because basically they are not, I don't have security enabled in my system. Once you enable this, you can actually secure your system and set up a password. If you don't, it will still work. The default password is the serial number of the device. So you're going to see that in just a second when we start programming. All right, so I'm going to cancel out of here, and I'm going to close out of here. Now, there is a question here. Is there any reason this SSH is not enabled by default within the Tessera units? That is a good question that I don't know the answer to. I believe that is basically optional. And I think that part of the reason is that once you enable, basically you are adding a lot of extra security and stuff. And I don't know if that messes with things, but yeah, I don't know exactly the answer of why it's not enabled by default. But sir, I believe that generally the rule is not to use it, but it's one of those things. All right, so You remember that a moment ago I said that the Tessera file is not related to the configuration of the control pad. So that means that I don't need to have a Tessera file open when I'm programming my control pad. It certainly makes it a lot more easy to have my Tessera file open to program those, and I'm going to show you that in just a minute. But basically, suppose that I don't have the file. I can still go to my control path designer, and this opens here, and actually here it's just showing a blank remote, and I have a section here, file, that allows me to create a new file, save, open. This on the server allows me to open a file from the server or send or configure multiple things, and this basically with the remotes that I'm actually working on. So for instance, let's say that I want to program a TECX 1000. I can click new, and basically it draws the panel and it shows the settings. These are the global settings for that panel. So I'm going to call this my first remote. And I'm going to tell it is a TECX 1000, and I'm going to say that is white. So basically this screen is just showing me exactly how that remote is going to look in real life. Now, right here in the layout, I can choose the layout, and when I select something different, you can see that the buttons actually change, and these are kind of like, these are just a highlight of where the buttons are. They are not yet configured, so nothing is happening. And this screen's text is basically what will show up here when the panel is idling, so you can actually change anything you want. This timing is because these buttons, when you have it in normal mode, you can press and hold, and if you hold, a command will send repeated times. The classic example, let's say that you configure a button to increase volume. You don't want to press, and basically each time that you press, kind of like increase the volume by a certain amount. It would be cool if you could just keep your finger on the button, and that volume starts increasing by a certain amount. The whole repeat is basically the time that is going to wait for that repetition to happen. So you can actually create a button that actually increases the volume by a certain step, and if you keep your finger on the button, then volume starts increasing. The TTP target is where we're going to be sending those TTP commands. By default is selected use server localhost. That means that the same device or the same server that is going to be the proxy is the one that I'm going to be controlling. So if I uncheck these, I can see that the host name or the IP address is 127.0.0.1, which is the local host. So basically that is kind of like telling me already that the server is kind of like sending a TTP to itself. But if I want to control a different device, it could be a device in a different system or a different device altogether, a third-party device, I could actually put here the IP address that I want to use as my target. Now, if I have set up protection and a password for my system, I need to enter the username and password. So basically, when I'm using the remote can actually communicate with the system. I didn't set up anyone, so I'm going to just leave it as is. Now, to program the buttons, you can either just click Control and then click the button, or if you're here, if you just click a button, it will jump automatically to Control. And in Control, basically, you have all the attributes for whatever you have selected here. So the selection is highlighted by these little dots, and you can change pretty much anything that you have on screen. So the Show button, actually, well, you can, as I said, you can hide a button. The text is, well, what text is going to show up, and actually it allows multiple lines. So for instance, I can say mute channel 1. Okay, so it actually supports multiple lines. You can change the text color. You can change the button color.
Power off.
Oops, sorry. And then you can change the mode. The mode is basically if you want normal or latching. Normal, as I said, is you push, something happens, the button doesn't change state. It's kind of like, for instance, you would use it for things like recalling a preset. Latch has two states, on off. So mute, for instance, you would use a latch. So I want to leave it in normal, and the actions, you can see that I have a press, a hold, and release. So any of these actions can actually trigger a TTP command. So not only You can trigger a single command when you press it. You could actually attach another command to be pressed if you hold, and another command when you release the button. So you can actually concatenate actions if you want to do something like that. So for instance, let's say this one is normal. Let's say that I'm going to recall a preset. Well, you could say here in screen text, recalling preset. So when you press the button, this message will appear right here. Now, when I go to the command, right here only says system. And since I don't have any file, basically, that's why it doesn't know. But it already knows that it can recall a preset. So it's actually telling me, oh, you want to recall a preset by name, you would have to set up your name. But if I was doing something different, let's say, I don't know, select an input, all right? Basically, system doesn't give me that option. So how do I do that? Well, in this case, since I don't have my Tessera file open, I need to create a raw string. So what I would do, I can check here raw string. This actually changes. I'm going to delete this 1 second. And you can say that basically we have a single space here, and actually I have a link to the command string calculator. So I can just click here, and that will take me to the Cornerstone command string calculator. And here, for instance, I can say I want to do a source selector, and I want to select, let's say, source selection. I want to set, and I want select one, and set that the instance of that selector is source selector one. There is my command. That command has been already copied to my clipboard. That is something that I added to this calculator. So I can come back here, paste it, and that is my TTP command. And basically now, if I send that to my system, if I click this, basically that command will be sent out. Now, provided that you have a source selector one, then input one is going to be selected. If I added another button and this button was latching, basically you have only the latch and unlatch functionality, and you can actually set, well, what you're going to be doing. Right? Now, I'm going to close this. I'm not going to save anything. And what I'm going to do is that I'm actually going to open a Tessera file, a sample file that I have here. And now I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I still haven't sent any files to my system, so my Forte is not even configured. But if I go now here to my control path designer, let me move this a little bit. I have a couple of source selectors here, but for different areas, and I have here some volume controls for those areas. This is kind of like a restaurant sound. So I'm going to add a new remote, and I'm going to still call it my first remote. It's going to be a TECX 1000. It's going to be white, and I'm going to leave it at 6 buttons. I'm going to restaurant. This is my restaurant, and I'm going to leave this in localhost. Now, when I go to control and I want to select this, I see here that I have a public space bar source selector. It actually has 2 inputs. So I can actually select either of these 2 inputs. Let's say that I want these first 2 buttons on the left to control that. So I'm going to change this label, and I'm going to call it bar source 1. Oops, source 1. And I'm going to change my text and my colors here. It is going to be a normal button because that's what I need for this. And then here in blocks, now you can see that I have all the blocks that I can control in this system. Well, it's actually a subset. It's not all the blocks. So I can see here that this source selector is source selector 1. So I can just pick that one. I said I want to select input source, and I want to select 1. So this is now actually reading the data from this file. Even though this file is not loaded yet into the system, it's actually reading that. And I can actually corroborate that. If I go here to raw string, I can see that it actually created that string for me. So in the background, control path designer, what it's doing is that it's building those TTP commands for you in the background. So if I want to set the second one, and well, here in the text screen, I'm going to say selecting source 1. So this one, I'm going to do something very similar. So I'm going to just say bar source 2. I'm going to change the color. I'm going to change this color. I'm going to leave it at normal. The screen text is going to be selecting source 2. And then the block is going to be the same block, and it's going to be a select input source, and I'm going to select source number 2. So those two buttons now are going to control that source selector. Now let's say that this level, my level 5 that actually controls the level for that area, I want to control it with a knob. So I can click on the knob, and you can see here that actually I have press, hold, release, rotate clockwise, and rotate counterclockwise. So those are all the actions that I can attach to this knob. So for instance, I can go here to rotate clockwise, and I say I want to control level 5, and I want to increment level, and it already knows that it has only one channel, and by default it's going to do it by 2 dB. So basically each click or each step on that knob is going to be 2 dB. You can change that and actually set it to whatever you want. You need to also set up the counterclockwise, otherwise basically you cannot reduce the volume. We thought it's like, well, why don't you configure both at the same time? It's like, well, we're giving you the flexibility to do whatever you like. So I'm going to do that. Let's say that I also want a button to mute this bar system, right? So I'm going to put another button here. Actually, I just saw a question. With the rotary knob, can volume be set dependent on which button you push? For example, zone 1 or volume or zone 2 volume? Not at the moment. Basically, the volume is fixed, and since the TECX is not a block, you cannot change the settings of it with a preset or anything like that. So the knob can control a single volume. You cannot change that on the fly and have it depending on which zone you are selecting, what volume you're going to be controlling. If you wanted to do something like that, probably the best way to do it would be with a TECX 2000 and have a pair of buttons to control the volume of zone number 1, a pair of buttons for zone number 2, and so on and so forth. So this one, I'm going to call it mute bar. And let's say that I want the LED bar to light up red or green when the bar is muted or not. So for the press, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it to red, and I'm going to change the screen test to muting, and the block that I'm controlling is going to be still that level 5. But what I'm going to control is the mute on channel 1. All right. Oops, this has to be latching. Muting. Oops. Block level 5, mute on. And the unlatch is going to be changed to green. Screen text is going to be unmuting. And the block is also going to be level 5. Attribute mute off. Channel is going to be left to 1. All right. So let's say that this is my remote. I'm happy with my design. What is the first thing that I need to do? Save that. So I'm going to here save as or save. And I'm going to move here to my desktop, and I'm going to save it in this folder. And I'm going to call this my first remote. And you can see that it's actually a JSON file. So it's actually a very small file. All right. Now, if I want to send this to the system, to the proxy, there are a couple of ways that I can do it. One is I can save as to the server. And what this would do is actually save this panel that I just programmed to the server. So it's only going to allow me to send only one. So basically, if I click here, it's actually going to go online, and it's going to look for what I have on my network. There is my Tessera Forte. And basically, to be able to see the devices, I need to enter the password. If my system is not protected, the default password is the serial number that I can see here. So I'm going to type that serial number. And when I click here, it says, okay, I have a TECX 1000. It is not configured. I could check that. And if I click OK, it will actually send that configuration straight into my system. But as I said, this allows me to send only one configuration at a time. Say that you actually have, I don't know, multiple configurations and you want to send all of them at the same time. You can do that. If you click configure, regardless of what you have open here, the window is a little bit different. You can see that basically it's showing me still the server, and it's asking me for a password. But if I now go here and enter this, I can actually see all the devices that are connected there. And now it is not assigning any file. Basically, what I need to do is that I need to select a file that I'm going to send to that device. So in this case, I can go here, browse, and I can go to that folder, and I can select that file. And this file is going to be sent to this remote. If I have multiple files or I had files already for my TECX 2000, I could select those as well, and I could send those right away. Now, before I do that, I am going to open a little, let's see if I can make this work. I was able to, come on, where is it? There it is. I need to move this. Oh, come on. I made it, there we go. And I think that I need to do this one as well. All right, there we go. So here are a couple of remotes that I have connected. So I'm only showing the TECX 1000 and the 2000. When they're idling and they don't have any configuration, they will show the model number on the top. They show the serial number, the host name. I know that it's kind of like a little blurry because of the camera. The device ID shows up on screen. There is the IP address, the firmware version, and the MAC address. So all that information is right on screen. So I'm going to go here again to configure. I'm going to type my serial number. And I'm going to select this. Go to my desktop. Grab that file and configure. And it's going to say, hey, are you sure you want to do this? So yes, I wanted to do this. It sends a configuration. It says, hey, I am done. And you can see here in the remote, as I said, sorry that it's not very clear, but it has been configured. So even, I don't know, maybe more light, or if that helps. No, it doesn't help much. All right, so I'm going to close here. And actually, I just loaded this, even though there is no file loaded in my Tessera file. So now, so if I click something here, basically the remote is trying to do something, but it's not controlling anything because it's not communicating with anything, because there's no Tessera file actually loaded in my system. So I'm going to go here, my Tessera system, and actually I'm going to load this. And also this means that if I were to reset initialize my Tessera Forte, and I have remote control pads already programmed, the Tessera file goes away, but the remote pads don't. So basically they are completely independent. So if I reset my device, basically my remotes would not go away. Right, so I'm gonna click that, and then I'm going to open right here, and I'm going to open my volume. And now if I go to my remote and I select my first source, I can see here that that source was selected. If I select source number 2, I can see that it says selecting source number 2, and source number 2 is actually selected. If I rotate my knob, I can see that I see a volume bar, and I can see the volume changing right here. And if I mute, actually the mute on the software changes as well. Now I set the light bar. This surface is black and it's matte, so it's not very reflective. But if I put, I don't know if you can see it, the light actually is not helping me. But you can see that it is LED, the light bar. If I mute it, it goes to red, so it actually changes. And since this is actually listening to the device, if I go here in Tessera and I unmute, it changes the state also in my control pad. So if you have multiple control pads or you're controlling from somewhere else, basically the control pad will actually update to what you are doing, right? Questions so far? If you can change the TECX with a preset, can you send it a command to change its ID, effectively mimicking a different TECX? Not that I know of. If there is such a command, it's so secret that that we don't know about it. That would actually be a really cool workaround. But no, there is no command that would allow you to control the TECX device and change something like that. Right? And actually, even if there was, because I think that there is something like that for other devices, but you cannot do that while the device is configured. So it would be kind of cumbersome. And I know what the desire is, and this is very high on our priority list, but it is not available at the moment. Right. So if I wanted to program the other remote, basically it's exactly the same procedure. Control path designer, you need to be able to actually send a configuration to a control path. You need to be disconnected from your Tezera file. But basically it's exactly the same procedure. You would open control path designer, you go to new, you need to name your remote. You need to select the model, if it's white or black. Well, you actually don't need to set that up. How many buttons that you want to use, and then just program your buttons to do what you want. And once you're done, basically remember to save that, and then you can actually just send that directly to your system. If you want to modify an existing file that is on the server, so for instance, let's say that I want to modify that TECX 1000 that I have programmed in my system, but I don't have the file, you can actually go to open. And then here I can type my serial number. It's telling me here's my TECX 1000 that is configured. I can check that. I click OK, and it's retrieving the file from the proxy. So now I have this file here open. I could add another button, and let's say that this is another button. Oops, another button. And let's say that this is going to control, I don't know, let's say this level, that is level 6. So I can just grab level 6 and I can say toggle mute. You can actually, for instance, you can have a normal button that when you press it, it mutes. When you press it again, it unmutes. And if that's the only change that I want to do, and I want to play it risky and I don't want to save that file into my computer, I can here under server, just click save. And if you look at my remote now has 4 buttons. So save will basically just grab that. And since I open it from the server, it actually knows where it goes. So I don't need to enter the serial number again or anything like that. It just sends that configuration right away to my system. All right. So pretty simple. Certainly, there are more things that you can do with a remote. Now, if you look at this file, let me move this out of the way and close this dialog. You can see here that I have AC input, there is a mono mixer, there is Uber filters, there is a whole bunch of other blocks in this file. Say, for instance, that I wanted to control, I don't know, the gain of one of these Uber filters. I want to control this filter right here, the one at 500 Hertz, and I want to increase and decrease the gain of that filter. If I go here to my control path designer, let's put here, I'm going to actually do a button 500 Hertz up. If I go here to my blocks and I look for that Uber filter, I'm going to see that it's not there. That doesn't mean that I cannot control it. Basically, right now, for this version, we are only including kind of like the most common blocks that we would want to control. Now, this doesn't mean that I cannot control this Uber filter. Basically, if I want to control it, what I need to do is use the raw string. So for that, I would need the instance tag of this Uber filter. And if I go here to my properties, that's Uber filter 20. So what I can do is I can just click here, raw string, go to my command string calculator. And in command string calculator, I can say, oh, I want to control Uber filter. I want to control band gain. I want to increment band number 2, that is a 500 band. And I want to increment by 1 dB, and it was Uber filter. Ooh, what was the number? 20. So Uber filter 20. So there is my command. I go back here. I paste that. And I can just save that into my remote. My remote just got that button there. And now here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to close here, and I need to connect to my system. And now here, if I'm going to open my, actually I can close this. There is my filter, and if I press the up key, you can actually see that band going up. So you can control, even though there is the block was not specifically in the drop-down list, that doesn't mean that you cannot control other things. I see another question here also. With the optional desk mount, you said there is a fixed CAT cable coming out of the back. Does it mean that you still need to wire the TECX to the desk mount? I haven't seen it personally. I think that the cable is already wired through the yoke, and it has a connector. So what you do is that when you grab the remote, if you look at the remote on the back, it has 2 connectors. So basically, you just grab the RJ45 connected to the in port, and then you kind of like just click the remote on the base, and that's pretty much it. All right, anything else? Any other questions? All right, so I'm gonna go back here to here. So how does it work in the background? Well, even though the TECX seems that it's sending a TTP command directly to the system, actually there is a control application that lives in the server device. So in my Tessera Forte or the Tessera server, basically there is a control application, and that control application is the one that is managing all that communication and all the control that is happening behind the scenes. So when you press a button on in one of the remotes, that remote just send a quick message to the server and say, hey, button number 3 was pressed. And that control application basically looks and say, oh, button number 3 on this remote means I need to do this. And that is a TTP command. So if the device that you're controlling is the same device that is being the proxy, it pretty much sends a TTP command to itself. On the background, the control application will subscribe to that parameter. So basically, you saw that when I changed the mute on my Tessera file, actually the mute button on the remote updated automatically. And that is because basically there is a subscription that is created automatically in the background. So when that parameter changes in my server, it announces that to the control application, and the control application tells the remote, hey, button number 3 was changed, so you should change you should update your state. And it shows the border and lights up the LED bar. Now, as I said in the beginning, you could actually be controlling a completely different system. So the system that is being the proxy, that is where the control application is. But your target could actually be a different system, that they are not related at all. So in this case, the functionality is exactly the same. You press your button, that tells the control application, hey, you need to do this. That TTP command is sent out to that system B. Now, when you do this, if you are controlling another Tezera system, the subscriptions will still work. But that second system, that system B, could be a third-party device. And well, since everybody uses commands in a different way, there is no way to guarantee that we're going to receive something that is meaningful to us so we can update buttons. There are still ways that we can actually mimic that functionality and allow that to happen. I'm not going to go into the details here, but that is certainly a possibility. All right. So that's kind of like what is happening in the background. Now, with this launch, there are a couple of Cornerstone assets. Maybe you have seen some of those already. There are landing pages for the TECX 1000, the 2000, and the table mount. I don't know if you have seen those, but now our products are coming. They come with like a little decals that have the a QR code. And if you scan that QR code with your phone, you're going to land in the landing page for that product, where you have pictures of the product. You have a quick start guide that will tell you, okay, basically how you open it up, how you install it, how you connect it, put it on the wall, and basically has the basic diagram or basic wiring configuration. There is a summarized description of the product, a little bit of the wiring, and there is also like a small FAQ, and there are links to other articles related to the product. So it's kind of like a quick access to finding information about a product. It's like if you have basically just grab your phone, scan the QR code, there you go. Also, there are 3 articles that have already been published. One is a general article on how to program the TECX control pad control the Tezera system, which pretty much covers roughly what I have covered during this presentation. And there's a couple of other articles, one controlling the source selector with the TECX control pad. Because certainly one way of controlling is the way that I did. But in the way that I did, you probably noticed that there is no indication in the button of which source is selected. This article actually covers how to do that. So basically the button will show which selection is actually active. And there's also a third article about controlling third-party devices with the TECX. And this explains either sending commands directly to that device, which would be more like a send and forget type of thing. So basically you send the command and you expect something to happen at the other end, or if you want some feedback and you want to use a little bit of that feedback. So there's a couple of ideas in that article that might be useful or interesting. Certainly, as more ideas and use cases come up, probably we're going to be publishing more articles, but those are already there and available. All right. And that's pretty much what I have. So if you have any questions, let me know. Or if not, I'm gonna remain connected for a couple more minutes. So if you have any questions, you can actually put it on the questions. As I said, well, this webinar has been recorded, so we're probably gonna post it on YouTube in the next couple of days. And you can also download the PDF for this presentation from the handouts section on the console on your right-hand side. But if there's nothing more, well, thank you very much, and hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you.